Well, thank you so much. Guess what we're going to be talking about today? I know no one is expecting it. We're going to be talking about AI. This is the surprise of the day, I know. But I think what we're going to be talking about today is how do we think about implementing it in a tactical way. We want to explore some of the topics ranging from governance frameworks to in our institutions as well as globally. We're going to talk about how that varies across geographies, how you might companies that operate and financial institutions that operate in different markets might want to think about their different frameworks against AI. We'd like to also talk about where we're seeing great use cases, where are things that we're seeing wins as we explore those different use cases, and of course, like how do we think about putting those wins into our own organization. Of course, let's talk about the challenges. It's not easy. It's not always easy, and I think we just had a presentation on why that might not be the case. And I would also like to talk about how we're measuring success here. So a lot to talk about, and limited time. We'll definitely at some point open up for conversations and questions, and we'll try and keep it as fluid as possible. I'm going to pass off to my right to Jessica to maybe introduce yourself as a starting point.
Sure. So I am Jessica Renier. I lead the digital finance team at the Institute of International Finance. We are based in Washington, D.C., but we have representative offices in Dubai, Singapore, Beijing, and Brussels. We are the trade association for the global financial industry with members across banks, insurance companies, asset managers, exchanges, crypto asset exchanges, payments companies, central banks, you name it, with about probably 450 members across about 70 different countries. So I say all that just to say we have a very broad kind of diverse set of perspectives and engagement on a regular basis all over the world that helps us kind of look at what's all of the noise, but what is the trend through the noise that you're hearing. Because if you're talking to that broad of a set of people and you do hear something in common, then it must be true at that point because it's just quite so broad. So I am responsible at the IF, certainly for AI, but also for all digital asset kinds of issues, payments, quantum computing, and the like. So busy portfolio lately. Thanks.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I don't think I can follow that. My name is Deepak Gandhi. I've been with Visa for 7 years now, but I've been in the software industry and the computation industry for a long time. I remember taking a master's level AI class in 1984. So I've been in this industry for some time. I joined Visa as a chief architect. I'm currently running generative AI from the corporate side of stuff. I'm on the IT side of things. So I look at technology and I look at application of technology to the real world problems within Visa, within the corporate side of Visa. Happy to answer any questions. Looking forward to this engagement. This is going to be fun.
Awesome. Yeah, we have such a great panel here. Super excited for this. So our main theme that we want to talk about is how do we think about applying AI in our organizations? And maybe a great place to start here is like, what is the guidance that we're hearing from regulators? Jessica, I know you spend a lot of time with governments and government-adjacent agencies. I'd be curious like what you're hearing and how maybe is that changing over time based off when generative AI started to be really top of mind? I'd love to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. So I think, a couple of years ago, I think the EU AI Act came in and just kind of dropped this giant bomb on regulation that was this comprehensive framework for regulating AI, in part as if AI had never existed before, but also its first iteration completely, it didn't even consider Gen AI because it really wasn't a thing, right? And then needed to be updated and adjusted and whatnot. And it is an impressive set, just as one example, an impressive set of legislation and a very large regulatory framework that we all need to know is out there, because even if it's not like here in the U.S., any corporations that are U.S. companies that are operating in Europe have to deal with the regulations that are in Europe, right? But it's also a bit of a lesson in being really early and too comprehensive, and then needing to adjust backwards, which the EU AI Act continues to have to do. And they've done so on liability and other things where they've had to pare it back because it just doesn't quite make sense. So we've gone from that as kind of the big mile marker to a shift, and I'd say the shift to, if you look at Japan, actually earlier this year, Japan then, the JFSA put out a report listing, potential risks, but actually looking, at the opportunities, and then emphasizing that the largest risk around AI was actually related to the risk of not deploying AI. Actually, the risk of not taking action quickly enough, as opposed to, and this is in direct kind of contrast to the European approach, which was, this stuff is super risky. We need to cram it into a box as much as we can, right? At first. Now, Europe has since then tried to emphasize a bit more on investment and whatnot. But for sure, those two initial frameworks are quite contrasting. Then you take the U.S. that has certainly taken on a much more investment forward approach. I'd say there are kinds of three legs of AI that I think about when countries approach it. One is investment heavy decisions, capacity building. Another is technical standards development. So I think about things that NIST does on behalf of industry, and then regulation. And there's those three pieces of the three-legged national stool, if you will. And each country will choose to prioritize one of those three things first, second, and third. And all of them will. It's just in a different order. So when we look at one country's approach to regulation or approach to investment or anything, the real question is which of those three, what is the order in which this particular country is prioritizing based on the just the current status of things that they have, like the pre-existence of hyperscale technology companies or other investment programs, or if they really just have regulation, and that's kind of their one tool. So I would say right now, overall, pretty disparate across the world. But the most important thing from a financial industry point of view right now is to recognize that the financial industry is heavily regulated already, and has all kinds of processes in place already for integrating new technologies. And where that is already the case, there is no need for another whole layer of sets of regulation on top of that, because that is what financial entities already do.
Oh, I'd love to jump into that, because I couldn't agree more. I feel like you made this comment here as AI is not necessarily a new thing. It's just a new way of doing things we're already doing in some ways. I'll localize it to maybe the RegTech context here. Greenlite, we build AI agents for financial crime and anti-money laundering. In our world, there's been model validation and model governance guidelines for a very long time. I think of things like OCC 2011-12, if you're thinking about transaction monitoring systems, of course, SR 11.7. There's strong definitions of what governance and controls already look like for any model that you're using in production. In some ways, generative is just another type of model. And I always like to say to people who are thinking about their AI governance strategies, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of good already in those systems. You need to know what are your inputs that you're putting into them. You need to make sure you have the same checks and balances. You need to have the right controls in place. Of course, it's a model, so there's risks associated with any model. How do you identify the risks with those novel models you might be using and put mitigations in place? Maybe Deepak, because you have such that range of experience, you were mentioning kind of your past experience in AI. I'm curious how you see the need for governance and how that might be changing with this new wave of technology. Where I guess we're saying a little bit that there's a lot of similarities. Is there anything that you're seeing that's novel that we need to make sure we are mitigating against?
Yeah. So personally, I don't see the AI technology stack, whether you're talking about automation or decision trees or expert systems, all the way down to machine ML and Gen AI. I don't see them as groundbreaking, changing anything. They're only more efficient ways of getting things done. They're tools. They're tools at your disposal. Just as you created software 15 years ago to do something, this is just another tool. It's a piece of software that you plug in that allows you to move things faster, process things faster. I think what has fundamentally changed is the three V's of big data: the variety of data, the velocity of data, and the volume of data, right? the things come at a very rapid pace. Regulations come very fast. Data comes at speed. Bad actors come in volume sometimes. So you got to treat so much data, so much input, so much variety at the same time in parallel. So more power you have, the better it is. And I think that is the power of Gen AI.
Yeah, maybe sticking with you, Deepak. I'd love to understand, like, what are some of the interesting use cases of this generative AI that you're seeing? As you describe, it's a new tool. What are you seeing that new tool being used for in an exciting way for you?
Yeah. So I think generative AI specifically is very much targeted to structured data and unstructured data and processing language and processing information at speed. There is a little bit of magic behind how it does it and makes it happen, but over time it has improved in the last 2 years to a point where the trust is starting to build. I'll be very honest. It wasn't there a year ago. It was less. It improved slightly. 6 months ago, it is getting slightly better. So the biggest value of the type of use cases are where you can easily take a collection of data from so many different places. Just the previous lecture that was here, they were talking about data and data quality and so on. Data is distributed all over the place, right? For example, at Visa, we are piloting an application called Visa Assist for our clients. Visa Assist is essentially an Gen AI enabled UI. I don't want to call it a chatbot anymore. It's a UI or an assistant. Let's call it an assistant that answers questions that are spread across all of Visa for clients, for external clients, right? And they have this information. It takes such a manual effort to ask the questions, to find out the information, to gather what they want, fees, policies, information about the products, and so on. Instead of doing all that, this product called Visa Assist is going to be embedded in a Visa Access online portal that is already there, that people are used to going there. That is where they normally go find the information, gather from here, gather from there, and so on. This is a one-stop shop. What it did is it converted content to knowledge. So you moved from a series of content hubs to one knowledge hub. And that knowledge, that is where you go to get all your questions answered. It's a very easy, low-hanging fruit. The adoption rate was fantastic. It was not advertised in the pilot program. And amazingly enough, the customers just kept on coming. With a small pilot, they kept on coming. Next month, in a few weeks, we're going to announce it to 15,000 organizations with 500,000 customers and users. And we totally expect it to really meet or exceed expectations. But the value that we added, which is why I wanted to add something to that, is we actually didn't focus on technology. We focused on the user, on the pain point. What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is success? What does success look like? And how do you walk back from that success? And the success is very easy. Make it easy to allow customers to find information about Visa and how to get onboarded. Additionally, what we did was we didn't have to do an entire new infrastructure. We took a low-hanging fruit, an easy one, like you said. What is the easy? Which Visa Access were already there. People were already logged in, so no new authentication needed. They already had limited access to content or whatever access was there. It is automatically enforced and implemented. And finally, we are tracking the user satisfaction. The biggest thing about Gen AI is don't fire and forget. It is changing so fast, and the user expectations are exponentially increasing also. So we are tracking that. And then there are traditional simple use cases like AML tracking, finding alerts for sanction violations and looking for users. So unstructured content, easy. Structured content, start thinking about what the users actually want and walk back from that.
There's two different threads that you pulled there that I would love to come back to. So the first one that you mentioned there is you're talking about the rollout, how you defined the right thing to be tackling, and how do you not fire and forget? I like that framing. Like, how do you continue to put like those guardrails in to make sure that they are successful over time? Maybe Jessica, bring to you, because I think you've now worked with many technology trends. This isn't your first rodeo, so to speak. You mentioned quantum computing, blockchain. Have you seen, be it institutions or governments, roll out or measure the success of a rollout or adoption of some sort of technology? Or how do you think we should be thinking about that rollout and or success of the technology that we're rolling out?
Yeah. Good questions. Hard questions.
Big question.
I guess I'd start a little bit earlier in the timeline, kind of getting back to some of Deepak's points of like deciding whether to pursue something at all in the first place.
Good question. Yeah.
And how one does. I think I've seen it for different technologies. A little bit different based on what is this largely an internal play to the corporation, or is this an externally driven economic change that's happening? So without going down kind of the payments rabbit hole, certainly the payments space right now is more of overall for the globe, how do we make money move in a way that supports economies better, and an economic driver that is simply going to force a change in how people operate, facilitated by new technology. We're not that far yet with AI, but there are certainly parts of kind of like, I always think about like the pyramid of human needs, right? Whatever is at like the base of the pyramid, which is like shelter, food, et cetera. Things that drive economies. If you always go back down there and you say, okay, what need is fundamentally still needing to be met, and somehow this technology, if applied to solving said problem, would change that. Okay, I see that as a long-term staying power, right? Those are some things. Other things, though, are we see across a lot of different companies, and in AI in particular right now, companies are trying to figure out, well, where do I test this out, or what programs do I create? And what we hear across a lot of our different FIs is certainly, rather than like the 1,000 flowers blooming thing, instead saying more what Deepak was describing, I believe, is more of an end-to-end treatment of something, is to say, all right, here is a process that it makes sense to apply this to, and I am going to go literally from start to finish of that entire process and understand it all and get it right, not spread myself thin over 100 different like interesting POCs. I think we've seen oftentimes in the evolution of technology, whether it's AI or anything else, you go through the mad POC phase where everybody's just trying a billion things out, and it's interesting and innovation, and it's cool to be the person that's innovating, right? But then you also see eventually companies come to a point where they're like, if you're not making money, you're leaving, right? Like, you were all the cool innovators at first, but you have not brought the company any money during this entire period of time. And a bunch of those people end up getting fired. And it turns over. And then the people who stay and make the next big impact are the people that say, all right, let me take this end to end with a clear process where this technology would fundamentally change productivity or change something that gets to like just the bottom cost structure of the company that sounded a lot less cool than some of the stuff at first. I actually like that a lot. The 1,000 flowers blooming is really a very interesting phrase that you used, because we at Visa we went through that journey also. We did hackathons left and right. We used to get thousands of entries, multiple thousands of entries, right? I remember the first hackathon we did, we fed in about 2,500 hackathon proposals using GenAI, using an ROI metric to say, is it feasible? What is the cost? Do we have the skills? What are the risks? What are the risks of doing this? What are the risks of not doing this? Like your point earlier, about 7 different measures, and we fed every single hackathon idea to an LLM and got the scoring. We applied weightage to it. The leader, let's say there were 10 proposals in legal, 5 proposals in compliance. The leader could then
tweak the knobs and say, I like the risk side of this better. If it is risky, I don't want to do it. However, if it is feasible and I have the right skills, somebody else might say, I'm going to prioritize that. I'm willing to take the risk because it is not a big deal in my domain. So the problem with 1,000 Flowers Blooming is you only reach just enough. You don't incubate enough to learn the hard lessons, and the hard lessons are really about the user. At the end of the day, you're doing this to enable your employees, your users, your customers to become better, faster, and bolder. So if you don't walk back from that success criteria and the end-to-end example that you gave, it really becomes hard for people to adopt and sustain it for a longer period of time. It becomes stale. How often does ChatGPT get released? Every few months. If you go to an older version of ChatGPT now, it is obsolete. You don't even want to touch it. It looks really, really sad, right? That is how fast things are moving. So,
yeah. This is probably just reminding me, I'm sure it's reminding a lot of people in the room about the MIT report of 95% of AI initiatives failing. And if I'm hearing correctly, some of the things that you guys are describing is make sure it has a specific use case or problem that you're solving, starting with the problem, to your point, like where do we even deploy it? Should we even deploy it? Is this the right, you mentioned a tool, you wouldn't use a calculator to hammer in a nail. Is it the right application of the tool? And then can you deploy it on that use case in an end-to-end way? I think is that what I'm hearing?
and Excel, I just want to add one more thing. Appreciate the risk appetite for your company, right? With 1,000 Flowers Blooming, everybody is taking risks. Every single one, all those 1,000 flowers are risky. But if you don't appreciate the risk appetite, eventually the POC will have to be stopped. So.
Yeah, we have at the IF, we convene a quarterly expert group across the world, just virtually, generally of chief AI officers of all of the different financial institutions that are members of ours. So if you think about all the big banks that are here, all the insurance companies, et cetera, we're talking with their chief AI officer or whoever they have dubbed to be kind of the person in charge, they talk with each other as they work through challenges that they're working on. Obviously not competitive information that they can't share with each other, but certainly sharing some information of just, hey, we were trying this and this is actually what we ran into, or we're thinking in our programs that we're running into, like, now we're past this stage of the technology, but I think really the problem for the industry is now at this stage of the technology. And one thing that one of our experts brought up that has really stuck with me is the need for ruthless prioritization attached that is aligned to your particular firm's strategy. So instead of, and this is true of any new tech, right, is instead of taking AI and saying, oh, well, it could be really good at this and I'll create this program at this, instead, we can only be good at so many things. We only have so many resources, and especially if we're going to take it from end to end instead of quick projects left and right. And so there was a whole discussion in that forum of how critical that, like, absolute ruthless prioritization from an investment standpoint of an institution right now is, to ensure that that case is well aligned with the business, the actual business strategy that your firm is taking as opposed to another firm.
This is really helpful, and I think you're all describing kind of this intentional approach towards taking something end-to-end and something that solves a business case. Deepak, I want to go back to you here because you probably have seen many proof of concepts, and what sounds like it's happening in the industry is nothing's graduating to a real-life use case that adds value. What are the successful traits of the initiatives that have moved to production that you've seen? And maybe what are some of the things you put in place to make sure you can help that path from pilot to production go well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've been through the journey, been burnt several times, failed a lot in order to be successful. And we got 2 or 3 big deployments within Visa that eventually led us to success. I think one of the biggest things that we overlooked, we didn't realize, is the currency of the offering, right? How accurate the data is, how current the data is. We used to refresh data every 24 hours to make sure the most staleness you would have is 24-hour old information. but it is so easy to miss that mark, right? And it is, especially when you're automating, and I use the term fire and forget, I'll go into reuse again. When we consume content from, say, 50 different places, if 4 automations are failing, we miss them sometimes. And that is where we failed a lot. So putting alerts, knowing your end up front, and walking back from that. Once again, it's like master's thesis. If you don't agree with your professor what the end result is going to be, you'll be doing your master's for 4 years. Same thing here. It is so important to systematically go step by step what all is required to be successful. And for us, I think it was, one is user feedback, usage. We know so much about our product right now, the product that I have. We would even know if a user gave a thumbs down, whether that user came back to the product or not. We're tracking at that level, right? So we want to make sure the product is in use. We want to make sure the product is current. And then whatever issues users are finding, we resolve it as quickly as possible. It is not about new features. It is about the current features that the users are used to and wanted.
Makes tons of sense. I think we've been talking about a lot of these use cases for AI, maybe shifting gears a little bit. I know in this room and at this conference, we have many risk management, audit, governance professionals here in the room who are watching all those flowers bloom, perhaps in their organization. What advice would you give them to make sure that they're managing the risk associated with the different pilots that might be taking place or the use of this technology? It's never been a harder time maybe to be in this governance world. As we discussed, there's been a lot, governance has been around for a long time, but what advice, if any, would we share with those folks who are watching those different technology initiatives take place and maybe have to think about managing and mitigating those risks?
I'll take that. Start out with a benchmark. You should know where you are starting with, and then you pick the investment that you want to make, which makes the most sense to the company. What is the business value? Is it about cost savings? Sometimes it is just about learning. You are in the early phases of your AI journey, and you just want to learn. So implement something quick, but take the risks of not getting the answers right, and then put in a lot of effort in change management, in pulling in your stakeholders, engaging with your users and customers, and making sure they're part of your journey. The product is for them. It is not for us, right? So all the AI components, I think personally, we should all be pluggable and should make sure that you have enough metrics to measure and ensure success over time.
And at a high level point, oftentimes we sit with our board of directors, which is kind of a unique board of about 40 of the CEOs and chairs of the big GSIBs and DSIBs and whatnot globally. And I'd say at the high level coming down, just make sure that you really understand your company's risk appetite. In fact, like your senior level person's risk appetite and what they believe their governance structure is. Just how far are they willing to go on something? And they might be more willing to take risk on a particular type of use case because of its strategic value to the firm versus a different type of use case. And just make sure that you have checked that and that you feel that you're pretty well grounded in what that governance framework in fact is before making any assumptions.
Absolutely. And also, this is a word of mouth product, right? You're at the end of the day, if the user is not happy, they stop using it. It's one of those things where gaining trust is hard, but losing trust is very easy. So make sure you are measuring and tracking that trust and engaging with. If the user stops using it or gives a negative feedback, immediately react to that and approach them.
Mm-hmm. I'll double click on this point that Jessica, you're making here about your most senior risk person's tolerance. It reminds me of a story. We were working with one of our Fortune 500 clients, and I was talking to the head of financial crimes, and we were just talking about all the great efficiency gains and all that good stuff. But I remember he paused me mid-sentence when I was getting so excited about efficiency gains. He said, "Hey, Will, this is great, but if I can't explain this, if me cannot explain this to my regulators, I don't really care about these efficiency gains. These efficiency gains don't matter at all. And I remember then we shifted gears and we had to explain like each of the steps of the technologies that he understood, and he understood how every single model was made. It goes back to, because we all operate in regulated industries, the outcomes are great, but the explainability and the thought process behind the decision to implement said tool for the job or said model for the job is really critical. I don't know if you have some thoughts there.
So very, very interesting. We actually ran into that use case, right? We were processing PDF files, and PDF files had images, right? And we decided to parse the image instead of using the alt text. So we parsed an image which sometimes was a graph, a discrete graph, and we wanted to interpolate the graph to give an answer, right? Big challenge. I don't know why we did it, to be honest. But as the moment we implemented it, we immediately put in 3 layers of caveats to the user before we answered the question. We said, this is from an image, which is a new technology. This is how we process the image and got the answer for you. And here is the original citation if you want to go to the real image. So that those disclaimers, that helped us build the trust. And even though we were not ready then, it was very much acceptable because we had their back, right?
We've definitely seen or heard feedback from institutions emphasizing the importance of knowing for sure that you have a very clear, strong governance process in place before trying to scale. And I know that to me, it sounds obvious, right? Like obviously you should have governance in place before you try to scale something. But you would be surprised by the number of entities and very experienced people that as they're looking at new things and increasingly kind of tech that has just moved like a whole step change in capability versus where they were before, how a firm can start moving in a direction on something, thinking that it has a good set of governance in place, and then run into decisions that they need to figure out how to take, and if they had just taken a little bit more time to ensure that they truly had very clear governance about just how far they were willing to go on something, it would have turned out a lot better before pursuing. So I live in the world of innovation is awesome all the time, and I'm absolutely a believer of that. However, on the flip side, on the regulatory side, on all of that, the importance not to the point of saying, oh, we have to regulate the heck out of something so that nobody can innovate. That's not what I'm saying. It's just you must have those structures in place so that you can innovate, because then you can actually scale instead of getting slapped on the hand by the regulators later.
Yeah. I would say as a technology provider, in some ways it's never been easier to make software. It's pretty easy to make things now with all the tools you have available to you. The hard part is the last 10 or 20%. Sometimes I would say to our teams, like auditability is the product, and the product's the easy part. Like making it explainable, compliant, and audible is very, very much the hard part. And that's where I've seen a lot of POCs fail because they don't think about that last 10 to 20% to get it production grade. But I completely hear you. Like making sure it's explainable is table stakes for the works that we're all doing here today.
So I was only going to add that to it from a technology perspective. A lot of people since you talked about vibe coding and using AI to code, a lot of people use AI to code, right? And AI seems to generate really, really good code, at least the first pass. And many people have claimed that they can generate entire websites using AI. I think what you just said, especially for the regulatory industry, I would like my AI to be the code reviewer, not the coder. Okay? Because code reviewer is the one who is putting all the guardrails, checking all the I's and the T's and making sure it follows the compliance, it follows the governance, the naming convention, whatever the convention is done. That is your last auditor before the code gets checked in. And that is where I think it is important.
Definitely. So we just have a few minutes left. Just wanted to open it up to the audience if there's any questions here. Talk about anything related to regulation, governance frameworks for rolling out AI, of course, use cases that we're seeing being successful. Just want to open it up to anyone.
Uh, the risk appetite came up a couple of times in your discussion. And you said something like the management should know their risk appetite and it has to be cascaded. But in reality, it's sort of a circle. The downstream is telling the management what the risks are and then set the appetite. So could you give a real life example how it's being done in your space? Because I see it as a circle, not like a upstream, downstream way of doing it.
That's a fantastic observation, actually, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it came out. Both of us had talked about risk appetite. You have to start small and iterate, right? When you're in the learning phase and everything is a black box, you got to show that something can be quickly done, right? So early on, even maybe a year and a half ago, we released something to say, here are the 4 content repositories that we want to quickly consume and answer questions. And then we said, here are a couple of things that seems like that it answered the question correctly and accurately and very systematically. And actually, this is an honest to God truth. A year ago, I was asking a question about how to increase my tax deduction, and it gave me a step-by-step. I said, well, if you know all this, why don't you just do it for me? And now we're talking about agentic AI. So the risk appetite increases over time. I think you have to build that trust. The first pass always will get a lot of feedback. Work with them, make them comfortable. See, everybody appreciates that things may not get right the first time, right? But it depends on how transparent and open you are. Going back to his audit compliance. And over time, as you prove the concept, the risk appetite gets better and better. Some cases you start from the top and assume the highest risk, but you have to make sure that is a low impact audience. So you have to look at reach and impact, right? Which audiences are you reaching? If you're reaching a small team of developers who are willing to take that risk, that is easy to take that appetite. Executives at the top level want to know that there is no loss, of either content, either trust. It's all mostly about trust, right? And about reputation. So that is the risk appetite generally comes from there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that it's kind of circular, or at least it's like up and down. I think somebody has to go up the chain and tell them, like, here's what I've assessed it to be, but then say, do you accept that? Are you okay with that? Right? The bottom doesn't get to determine what it is. They can do an assessment of what it would be, and at certain points make decisions. But you are going to have to push that up and say, is this acceptable to the people above me or not at that, and especially when it gets to higher stakes, things like reputation, which anytime that there's a new technology, reputation is pretty high on the list. Typically. But one of the things that I think I do want to make sure to say too with that is, we're at a RegTech conference. And I think if there's ever a time for RegTech, and I would say RegTech and soup tech, I quite frankly don't know why there are 2 different words. It's just tech for compliance sake, but who is using it? Which I don't see why there are 2 different words. But there are supervisors employing it versus companies employing it. If ever there was a time for it, this is that time. This is that time because of just the advances in technology that are now are capable. And any time that we're talking about AI applied in a RegTech context, we need to also be talking about soup tech, and we need to be helping our regulators and our supervisors also deploy the technology so that it's a 2-way street working together to get the most gains here. It cannot, if it is only industry that's saying, how do we just deploy this so that it takes some of the compliance burden and other things and risk out for us, we are missing half of the potential. And it's very easy to kind of say, well, that's just my half, they're going to have to do their half. It is our job as industry to work with our regulators and work with our supervisors and help them understand what we're doing so that they can actually get better at doing what they're doing so that it benefits us, right? So I would implore everyone to not forget the other half of this conversation, which is the soup tech conversation.
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me. Hi, my name is Ramana Malik. I'm Bank Regulatory Compliance covering RBC Capital Markets. I have a two-part question. So one is, Jessica and others, you've talked a little bit about governance frameworks, hot topic. What I'm curious about is, from your experience, and maybe for the panel, you've mentioned, you should have the guardrails in place before deploying this, right? And I think we here all agree with that. But from your experience, what are those things that you've seen where you started building a governance framework and then sort of had that aha moment to say, oh yeah, we didn't think about that, or this is net new, we need to think about this and implement this into the governance framework? So that's part A. And part B is, how have you seen AI change the role of advisory compliance officers who have to support businesses or like real-time transactions?
I have short answers to that, and I expect that Deepak might have slightly better answers to the first one in terms of where you've run into something and said, aha. Largely because as my role at a trade association, I'm not actually building those frameworks, but I'm talking with all of the people who have been building with them. So I'm going to go off of kind of what I've heard them run into at points that they've shared it. I would say I've certainly heard the challenge, not so much that they didn't think of it, but the challenge right now with questions around critical third parties with respect to AI. Which is different. The challenge of kind of knowing fully your third party has been increased because firms are telling us that they don't necessarily have the level of visibility into models or into the training of the models or anything that they feel that they need in order to run the same risk process that they can do if they have built something internally. Nor do they have the legal contractual ability to require that information from the third party to be able to fully to kind of run what they believe is an up to snuff process that would make them feel as comfortable as they believe they should feel. So it's not something that I would say kind of in a governance process they didn't anticipate, but I think the degree to which that piece is a larger boulder than was originally imagined or thought of is certainly bigger. I think getting kind of definitely up there on the list of priorities for question marks to deal with from a regulatory standpoint going forward. In terms of how it has impacted roles, I would just quickly on that. I would say more in governance boards or governance bodies that we've heard talked about. There are questions around what types of skills that somebody should have to sit on a governance board on risk for AI. So instead of just saying, oh, these are all senior people that have made it up through the firm and now they sit on this risk governance committee, instead, well, do any of them understand AI? Right? Or do any of them understand, like, how do they get how data is being used here? Like, maybe we need different skill sets than just somebody that is senior and has worked their way up onto a governance board. So I think the composition of talent on these boards is kind of changing.
Yeah, so when we talk about governance, most of the time we talk about the data use policy and the data security. We talk about fairness, we talk about security, data leakage, content leakage, privacy, and so on. The one aha moment for us was the cost of false positives. That was the biggest thing. You could not move the needle if there were false positives. even small amount of false positives, right? You would think that you can release an AI product with 95% confidence level. Most people start with 70% confidence level, that the accuracy is good. Even 95% is not good enough. That 5% of false positives is what can kill your product, kill your initiative.
Okay. All right, I think we're just at time there. Thank you so much, everyone.